The Bishop, E.W. Jackson, ran for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia in 2013. Now the president of STAND. He's got a great conference call also on this subject this afternoon. We're going to be talking about that. E.W. Jackson, great to have you with us.
Well, thank you, John. Great to be with you.
Now, I want to get to war against ISIS. Let me just ask you flat out. You ran for U.S. Senate in 2012. You raised over $100,000 in that race. Are we in a war or not?
No, we're definitely in a war. There's no question about it. But, you know, and that's why I'm so looking forward to having General Boykin on my call today, because we need clear, unequivocal expression of the threat that we are facing so that the American people can respond to that. You know, I don't think anybody wants to go to war. Nobody wants to do this. But we also understand Ronald Reagan had this, I think, appropriate concept, peace through strength. The way you avoid war, you minimize the potential, the likelihood of war, the length of war, is you respond with strength to any threat. And what we're responding with is so milquetoast and weak and limp-wrist, and it's just a really sad thing to see our country responding in a way that is completely contrary to the American spirit.
Bishop Jackson, do you feel that bombing ISIS through Iraq and Syria is the right thing to do or not?
Well, you know, we are in a tremendous conundrum, and unfortunately, we don't have leadership to sort of walk us through this. Right. We don't want to leave Iran strengthened. We don't want to leave Assad strengthened. We don't want to leave the Syrian government that's presently in place strengthened necessarily. I mean, we've already made ourselves, and he's made himself our enemy, so to speak. Of course, you could go back, and this is like trying to untie 20 knots in a rope, you know, because the president has created a lot of these knots by saying things that really didn't need to be said and taking positions that weren't necessarily in the best interest of the United States of America, which ought to be the basis for our foreign policy. So in my view, we ought to have a flyover zone. We ought to make clear to Assad that, you know, that nothing that we do changes the policy that we have about him. I mean, he's annihilating his own people when we can't be supportive of that either. So right now, it just seems that we, you know, Netanyahu's speech was an indication of that. It seems that we are willing to say, well, since we have a common enemy, we will now be friends. I think that's a big mistake because, you know, Iran, and particularly Iran, is the scorpion that invites you to cross the river and promises to ride on your back without stinging you, and then gets out in the middle and says the reason why he ultimately stung and killed you was that it was his nature. So we're not handling this very deftly, that's for sure.
Now, the majority of military advisors that we have had on our show and have been on other national media type shows like mine have said, look, at the end of the day, if the objective is to defeat ISIS or take them out or really severely limit their ability to harm the U.S., we're going to have to send ground troops in. We can't do this from the air, and there's no other of these 18 coalition countries who have committed ground troops other than perhaps the United Kingdom. So, having said that, do you think we're going to have to send troops in to clean up this mess?
Well, look, it's difficult. I don't think we have any choice. I think that's what it's going to ultimately come down to. We're either going to fight them there or we're going to fight them here. I believe that. Unfortunately, you know, the important thing, well, at least something that we have to be aware of, and why the American people have to really be thinking about this. When we choose leaders choose a president, for example, with absolutely no military experience, no understanding, and apparently an unwillingness even to listen to the military experts, no matter what their advice is, no matter how unified they are in that advice, he somehow knows better. Now, I could see, you know, overruling them here and there, because there may be times when the president just says, you know, I know that's what you want to do. That's not what we're going to do. And maybe John Kennedy would have been better off to overrule the Bay of Pigs operation, you know, but... Right. But that every time their advice is always wrong and your judgment's always right, So, yeah, they're saying that we're going to have some boots on the ground. But what I was going to say is, I don't believe this would have been necessary if the president had entered into an aggressive status of forces agreement. That would have been the ounce of prevention that would have avoided the pound of cure that we're now going to have to pay in order to get the situation under control again.
Let's get to arming Syrian rebels. 3 weeks ago, President Obama said, well, we can't really do that because they're not really military guys. They're shopkeepers. They run bazaars. They're doctors. They're lawyers. They're street vendors. They're not really fighters. We can't do that. Then in 3 weeks, he says, okay, now we need to arm the moderate rebels, which in and of itself is an oxymoron. If you were in the U.S. Senate, would you have voted up or down on that?
I would have to have voted, let's put it this way, based on what I now know, I would have to have voted against that. It seems that every time we've done this, almost without fail, it comes back to bite us. Every time we've done it, it comes back to bite us. Our own weapons end up being used against us or against our allies or against innocent civilians. This is why boots on the ground becomes important. I think we've got to control what happens here rather than trying to fight this war through surrogates, pretend it's really not a war and the surrogates will take care of it. Remember, when the president left Iraq, he left it with the assurance that the Iraqi army was perfectly capable now of defending Iraq. Well, we saw how long that lasted. As soon as ISIS began to move with any great energy and force, they dropped their weapons and turned tail and run. So, this is about the interests of the United States of America. It is ultimately not about the interests of Iraq. It's not about the interests, obviously, of Syria or even of those people, and I have great sympathy for what they're going through. This is about our interests, and we got to do what is necessary to protect the safety, security, and the interests of the United States of America and our allies.
President Obama, when he put this coalition together, E.W. Jackson, said that U.S. troops wouldn't be on the ground, that he would be able to get other Arabian countries to get involved in this. So far, we haven't seen it. Now, on 60 Minutes, he comes back again 2 weeks after his big speech, and the kind of the tune changes. Are you getting tired of just being told something and then 2 weeks after it's something else?
John, I've stopped listening to him, and I don't mean any disrespect when I say that. He is so his foreign policy statements are so confusing. He says one thing, he reverses himself, he says something, and then when the blowback happens, all of a sudden they walk that back, and that's not what he meant, and we misunderstood. Just like him throwing Clapper under the bus and saying that our intelligence agencies underestimated the threat of ISIS and overestimated the response of the Iraqi army. And then, it wasn't him, it was them. And then suddenly, no, I've got complete confidence in them. They're doing the job. I just reflect back on when Bush sent troops into Iraq, and we couldn't find weapons of mass destruction, even though there was consensus in the intelligence community worldwide, by the way, that he had weapons of mass destruction. When Bush tried to explain the situation by releasing the briefings he was getting, what was the mantra? Bush lied, people died. So I've just stopped trying to make sense, because if you listen to him, you'll end up just as confused, frankly, as he is on the issue of foreign policy.
Bishop B.W. Jackson, former Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor 2013, U.S. Senate 2012. Bishop Jackson, at the June convention in Roanoke to nominate a U.S. Senate candidate, you made the nominating speech, a very compelling one, by the way, for Shaq Hill, former veteran like yourself, but Ed Gillespie ended up being the nominee. We have been very disappointed in the Gillespie campaign. We feel the professional messenger has no message, and I've not been shy about saying that he hasn't weighed in with any authority on some of the major issues of the day. Do you think that's why he's still lagging behind, so far behind Mark Warner?
Well, look, I think that Ed Gillespie is doing the very best he can in a very, very difficult situation. And I am supporting him. I'm praying for him. Look, I think the people can, obviously I supported Shaquille for the nomination, but as always, what I've said, when the nominating process is over, I think that every Republican ought to do the very best we can to get our nominee elected. That's what it means to be a member of a party. So I put aside any criticisms that I might have had that caused me to support Shaquille rather than Ed Gillespie, and I'm trying to make sure that Ed Gillespie gets elected over Mark Warner. But I know it doesn't look good right now. I saw Ed, in fact, I think it was the day before yesterday. I saw him. He reassured me that things are looking good, that the race is tightening up, and that he's going to shock a lot of people. So I'm just hoping and praying that he's right.
I think the Republicans are going to ultimately win the U.S. Senate. I've got the over and under right now as 8. And if I was betting on that myself, I would bet the over. I think they're going to win 9 or 10 seats. Having said that, when you look at this, EW, just based on historical fact, and you look at Mitch McConnell, not the most inspiring majority leader. Conservatives had a lot of issues with him, understanding that we can't let Obama run amok, basically, for his last 2 years of lame duck. But if the Republicans take over, do you actually envision a change?
Well, yes, but only for this reason. The grassroots people are going to have to demand it. I don't think that we're going to see a change because Republicans are necessarily going to do it of their own volition. And I don't mean to disparage Republicans when I say that, but there is a tendency to go for safety over leadership and vision, to go for security rather than integrity. And I think we just got to make sure the grassroots people let the Republicans know we're expecting them to block President Obama's appointments to the judiciary because they're bad appointments. We're expecting them to block his appointments to some of these cabinet positions if those appointments don't demonstrate a person who is not from the far radical left of the Democrat Party, which is what President Obama represents. So they've got some work to do, and they're going to have to, as they say, put on the big boy pants and really get at it. So yes, I think the grassroots are going to make sure that having fought for a Republican Senate, that Republican Senate does what we expect them to do, which is to uphold the Republican principles that this president, and frankly, uphold the constitutional principles that have made the country great, and that this president, in my view, has just completely disregarded.
Bishop Jackson, what will be Attorney General Eric Holder's legacy?
It's sad to say, but I think that Attorney General Holder will go down as one of the most divisive and partisan attorney generals in the history of our country. In fact, it's interesting. I liken him more than anybody else to Attorney General Mitchell under Richard Nixon, because it was clear that he was prepared not to be a law enforcement officer, but to do President Nixon's bidding. And this seems to me to be exactly what Eric Holder sees as his role. Now, I know all attorney generals are political people. That's how they end up with those appointments. But I think some have had the foresight to know that I want to preserve the integrity of this office and demonstrate this is the top law enforcement official in the country, ought to garner the respect of the American people by conducting himself with a level of neutrality and integrity. And this Attorney General, unfortunately, has done exactly the opposite. And by the way, let me just add as a footnote, a big footnote, has been extremely racially divisive. Rather than using the office to try to bring us together, he has instead divided us at every turn.
Okay, final thing. I've got just a few seconds. Your conference call today with the general. How do people call in? What time is it?
Okay, people can call in. First of all, they can go to the website, standamerica.us, or they can call in themselves. And please do that, by the way, and sign up, get on our mail list. 712-432-0900, and the code is 199-176. That's 712-432-0900. The code is 199-176 pound to talk to the General and me.
Okay, that's going to be the final word. We want to thank E.W. Jackson for being with us. Keep it here.
Thank you, John.